This is Hot Science with the week's top stories in science, technology, environment, and medicine. It's hosted by Richard Clarke. That's me, and welcome.
All right.
So let me review the stories for the week. And the top news is a story about China and the population of the world. And the headline is Population Decline is not a problem, and more babies isn't a solution. And in technology, a story about EVs that says it doesn't take that many electric cars to improve public health. And this is an interesting report on a study that was done in California. And then in environment, renewables will be the world's top electricity source within 3 years. So that change is happening and happening really pretty fast. And in materials, we have yet another story of unusual behavior of magic layer graphene. And here they have found a way to make superconductivity switch on and off in magic angle graphene. And in space, the article is astronomers find a new ring system in the outer solar system. So another ring, I guess we can't call it planet, but it's another ring satellite of the sun. And in animal story is a kayaker singing in hopes of attracting beluga whales, never imagined they were actually listening. And the human story is just one quality conversation with a friend boosts daily well-being. So maybe part of what we're doing today is our daily well-being boost. And then the medical story, a COVID story, and it's how quickly does COVID immunity fade? What scientists know, and I would say it didn't have it in the headline, and what they don't know is more than what they know about this part of it. So then let's get on with the population decline. As you have been hearing from me, China just last month reported for their first population decline in more than 6 decades. And now the prediction is by the end of the century, China may have only about half of its 1.4 billion people. And so this news is framed often as the start of China's inexorable decline. That's been kind of the way I've been framing it. It's also been given as a harbinger of demographic and economic time bomb that is going to strain the world's capacity to support an aging population. And China is only the latest and largest country to join a club of shrinking countries. And Other members are Japan, South Korea, Russia, and Italy, and others. Germany would be facing a decline too, except for immigration. The US also would be facing a decline without immigration. And so the median UN projections say that population is going to peak around 2080. But if fertility rates continue to decline, we could see the population declining earlier. I've seen predictions as early as 2050. And so what the authors of this article are saying, rather than focus on the concerns like labor shortages and support of old people, then maybe it's good to look at the brighter side. And if you look at the brighter side, then the population declines that have come around throughout the world are actually mainly a happy story of greater longevity and freedom. Fertility rates worldwide have dropped from 5 per woman in 50 years ago to 2.3 in 2020. So birth rates, fertility rates have declined by more than half. And China, South Korea, and Japan are all in population declines, but this is due in part to rapid increases in income, employment, and education. One example of this is in South Korea. Their women who went to post-secondary school rose from 6% in 1980 to more than 90% now. So that's an incredible increase in the number of educated people. This also lends to their choice to stay unmarried for women, but with higher pay and more professional opportunities than they had before. And more women in the workplace means actually greater productivity and prosperity. And compared to half century ago, people in many countries are richer, healthier, and better educated, and women are more empowered. And world life expectancy has increased from 51 years in 1960 to 73 in 2019. And increases of that magnitude in lifespan really reshape lives and open up opportunity. Fewer people on the planet, of course, will reduce the pressure on the environment and the resources of the world. And so global populations are going to decline. And rather than trying to reverse that, we need to figure out how to embrace it and to adapt. One of the things I think is going to be a big problem is still with the capitalist systems of the world. It's hard to keep growing your company and your business when the number of people you have to sell to is starting to decline. So big adjustments are coming, and these changes in China are just one sign of that. So what do you guys think?
Well, with a declining population, but those that are there essentially richer means that you can now sell product to larger numbers of people that you couldn't before. because there wasn't enough money. You know what I mean? It's it was a lot of people doesn't necessarily mean a large market. It takes money to define the market.
The bigger problem is going to be the aging demographic and funding the healthcare needs of this elderly population with a smaller working population.
Right.
And so what we can expect are more death with dignity type campaigns and hospice only care for the terminally ill and all that sort of thing. They'll be encouraging people to make their exit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yes,
but
I think that's true. But it was nice to read about instead of just the doom and gloom, read about the bright side of population decline. And one of the bright side was an increase in the labor force of women going into the labor force, which he said would help to offset that.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons why the birth rate continues to go down is women are choosing to have a life instead of being a mother.
yeah,
You're muted, Andrew.
To make babies. It's hard to make babies at work.
In the old days, children were an asset. Now they're a liability. So people have fewer.
Right. Well, again, this is all part of the move from the farm to the city, because in the farm environment, children are more labor force, and in the city, they're an expense.
well, I think that's an old-fashioned viewpoint. I think farms have automated to the point where two guys can do the work of 20. Now,
You obviously haven't seen them planting rice in India.
that's true.
So the farms you're speaking about are the farms in developed countries, and that's still a small percentage of the countries in the world.
Yeah.
Anyway, again, it will be interesting to imagine what's going to happen. I think we're of an age group that we're not going to see what happens at the end of the century. So we just get to imagine.
Well, and there'll be all manner of unforeseen consequences that
Absolutely.
and surprises, like more and more jobs will be in the healthcare and services that cost money and don't produce income. So,
But I also think that as people get older, the time for retirement probably gets also pushed up a little bit. Whereas people would retire, relatively speaking, at 65, now they might retire at 70 or 75 or something like that.
Yeah, so far they have not. I don't know where they have been successful at increasing the retirement age. I know when they try to do it in the US, they get in trouble. I think there were trouble in France over them trying to increase the retirement age too. So while it makes sense from one point of view, I know I was happy looking forward to the time when I could retire. And I would have been irritated if they'd have told me, hold it, you have to wait another 5 years.
Yeah,
well, in our parents' generation, they retired at 65 and they were gone by the time they were 70. Few
Right.
people had more than 5 years of retirement, and now people get 20 years of retirement.
Right. Well,
or more.
or more. You know, my parents both died in their late 80s, so you know, it's
There were exceptions to the rule, but
right.
well, even our parents' generation lived longer than our grandparents' generation, I guess.
Right, right.
Well,
Anyway,
next
sir.
week, I will have retired for 30 years.
Congratulations. That's worth celebrating.
I'm almost equaling how much time I work. So
Okay. Well, I'm afraid, how long have I been retired? I've been retired for 15 years or so, and I worked for 45 years, so I'm going to have to live a long time before I am retired longer than I worked.
Well, and just because you retired doesn't mean you've stopped working.
That's right. Well, of course, I just stopped getting income.
well, that's true too. Thank you. I retired, and Andrew, 30 years ago from my first job. And then I worked another 10, 15 years making real money.
Uh-huh.
You don't make real money in the federal government, but what you do get is a nice retirement.
Uh-huh. Okay, now moving on to technology and EV story, and transportation in the U.S. is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, and there is the big process of electrifying cars and trucks as a step in dealing with the environmental impact, but there are more impacts than just a change in CO2 levels. Switching from hydrocarbons to electricity has immediate benefits for the environment and for public health. And so a study that was done in California, where they studied real world data from 1,200 zip codes across California between 2013 and 2019. They tracked EV registrations and then also total measurements of nitrogen dioxide and compared it with emergency room admissions. And what they found was that in California anyway, for every 20 EV vehicles registered per 1,000 people, there was a 3.2% drop in the rate of emergency room visits due to asthma, which is one of the main issues that comes from this environmental pollution. And what they saw in this study over this 7-year period is that as EV penetration grew, ER visits dropped. And so this is encouraging. EVs aren't the only way of reducing air pollution, of course. And even an EV isn't necessarily better than an internal combustion engine. The carbon footprint of a big EV, like a Hummer, is larger than that of a tiny gasoline car. So you still have to look at the details. But other ways that we can impact this in transportation, one big way, of course, is electrifying public transportation and then trucks and fleet vehicles. And it's also an important tactic is making it easier to live without a car at all. That might have the biggest benefits. But anyway, this is just current information based on data, not models, that points to an improvement in public health with as EVs get set up and distributed and used.
Well, one thing they didn't say was that in emergency room visits everywhere, even in the inner city, or was it only in the suburbs where EVs are more common and more available? People in these high density inner city neighborhoods don't have EVs.
Right. Well, it said certainly in terms of EV adoption, it's a lot different based on income levels. They weren't able to look at income levels. They were able to look at education levels and use that as a proxy for income. And what they certainly saw was, more adoption of EVs in places that have more money. But still, I think urban EVs were covered. They said they got 1,200 zips in California, and they did. It seemed like they covered low-income areas as well.
And presumably it's emergency room visits across the board, you'd hope.
Uh-huh. Well, again, they were just looking at emergency room visits for asthma.
And only in those zip codes.
How many
Only
zip
in-
codes? How many zip codes are in California? There can't be more than 1,000, are there?
There could be. It's a big state.
Oh.
So they said 1,200. And I don't remember how many zip codes. There was some time when I was a sales automation consultant that I might have known, but not now.
Well, maybe the zip codes were all in Silicon Valley and San Francisco.
I don't think so. Okay, now continuing with environmental stuff. They are now saying renewables will be the world's top electricity source within 3 years. So renewables will also, they will not only be able to be the major source, but we're now in a period where electricity demand is rising again as we're recovering from the pandemic and the slowdown for the pandemic. Electricity use is rising now at about 9% a year, which is a pretty steep raise. And it looks like pretty much all of the increased demand between now and 2025 will be covered by the increase in renewables and nuclear. Now they're including nuclear within this, since nuclear does not produce any greenhouse gases. And so renewables and nuclear energy will dominate the growth of the global electricity over the next 3 years and cover more than 90% of the additional demand. Renewables will overtake coal to become the largest source of electricity in that same period. And what they say, power sector CO2 emissions will plateau during that time, though it looks like if you look in the detail, there might be a little bit of a decline. this still is going to leave them, last year was the greatest year of CO2 being emissions coming from the power sector ever. And what's going to happen is still for the next few years, it's still going to plateau there, and we're still not going to see much decline. What will happen, it looks like, is the increased demand is going to be handled by the renewables as they come online. Here I have a few charts to show you if I can find them. Here is in this chart shows electricity consumption over the world by region. And if you look at it, US and Europe are the top two bands, the blue and the purple. They're pretty much the same over this 35-year period of the chart. But if you look at the bottom two, which are Asia and China, they have come from a small portion to where by 2025, they will be more than half of the electricity demand. So electricity use is increasing, but it's mainly in Asia, mainly in China, in India. And if here is a simple chart showing the kilowatts provided by the different kind of sources in 2022 and 2025. If you look at it, things coal, gas, nuclear, and other are all basically pretty flat. Nuclear goes up a little bit. What you see is this fairly steep rise in renewables over the time, and renewables overall increase the amount of power they're generating by about 20%. So that's still a fairly steep growth rate, and that's 20% in 3 years. And here is a total forecast and history of global emissions by different segments. What to look at here is we go through this period from 2015 through about 2021, where there's a gradual increase year to year from then. And from about now to about 2025, it's flat or maybe a little bit of a decline, but that gives you kind of a picture of what's going on. We're still not seeing the point where global emissions are dropping yet, but having them plateau at least is a good step along the way. So one other thing that I noticed going through the details is, as they're looking at the power side, then now part of the concern with more renewables is demand side flexibility, because renewables aren't always on. So you have to have a way, flexible ways of being able to handle that. And there's a class where they're calling dispatchable renewables, and those include hydro reservoirs and biomass plants, which are things that you can turn on when other power sources are low. The other thing that they're concerned about is battery storage. And last year in the US, they added 90% more than they did in the previous year. So the battery installations are going on at a rapid rate in the US. So you see in this, changes are actually happening.
But the one thing is those batteries they showed it about 18 gigawatts
Right.
of power versus the 30,000 terawatts of power that's needed. So right now, batteries are about 1/2 millionth of the total demand. And even though they've increased significantly in the last couple of years, the idea that they're going to become a significant dispatchable backup to the renewable is an illusion. So don't figure that batteries are going to change everything. The other thing is when they talk about renewables, hydro is about half of the renewable power. Now, admittedly, hydro growth is pretty flat right now because there's a lot of environmental resistance to more hydro. But the other significant renewable is bio. And when they talk about bio, what they're really talking about is wood pellets and
Right.
wood pellets in old coal-fired plants that have been converted. So just the idea that in barely 2.5 years that wind and solar are going to be the be-all and end-all is, I think, an imaginary thinking.
Well, I have had solar panels. Well, I was among the first maybe 30 people or so that in this area that had solar panels on the roof. And the way it's set up here, I don't know if you know this, is that the power that is being generated by my solar panels just go directly to the electric company and is just part of the electricity that's available. And the way I get compensated for that is that I have a meter which differs from other people's meters in that it registers the amount of electricity I send to the electric company and the amount of electricity that I get back and use, and I'm being billed for that. And for many years before I was living with Diane anyway, I paid something like 40 or 50 pesos a month for my electricity, whereas my neighbors were like shelling out 600 or 700 pesos for the same amount of electricity. So this is one thing. The in terms of batteries, by the way, I read a story where apparently this is being overlooked with the fact that there are so many cars around and all the cars have a battery that cars can be the backup power that is wanted, in case of a power outage. Have you ever thought of that?
There have been schemes proposed where the idle cars at night would be somehow plugged in and
Yeah, right.
available
Yeah,
as backup power.
yeah,
People
yeah.
have talked about that, but they've been talking about that for at least 10 years, but nothing really has happened yet.
No, but it makes sense, and
All these things make sense. They just don't happen quickly. They take time.
yeah,
But they
But
have
still, within the standpoint of things don't happen quickly, the changes that have been happening in both EVs and renewable powers, there have been massive changes that are underway that really are happening very fast in terms of the scale of those changes. So,
and part of that is because they're coming from small starts. So when
sure,
you have a
but
small
of course.
start,
Of course. But if to have renewables of all kinds be half of the world's power by 3 years from now, this is not a small start period. This is, we're already in the steep part of the adoption curve instead of the low, slow beginning part.
Well, the other interesting thing is for solar and wind, you do need the backup dispatchable power that the article mentions.
Right.
And so if you're going to have, say, 100 units of solar, you also need 100 units of backup to, like if you had the batteries, you'd have to have 200 units of solar so that you could be charging the batteries for when the solar wasn't available. You know what I mean?
I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure about your numbers, but
Well, it's
you know,
just that
anyway,
yeah.
I understand what you're saying, and we'll see. We're still in the middle where these changes are happening, and they're happening fast, and the impact of them are going to be beyond what people think. Given the article we had before this about the public health impacts, for example, there are going to be benefits that are not figured in most of the calculations. You know, so we'll see.
I'd like to make a comment out of curiosity. I read the comments at the end of this article, and comment number 1 was about as long as the article itself, written by someone who obviously knew what they were talking about. And this person was critical of the IEA for historically underestimating the solar power coming on board. And they would estimate it always way, way low.
Right.
And also they don't recognize hydrogen as a renewable that's coming up and making do. He says that the reason is because the IEA is indirectly funded by interested parties, so it's not clean. It's not clean research. So there are fossil fuel companies involved, and boards and committees, and that it has to go through to get approved. And
right. So I think the IEA is actually pretty conservative in terms of their estimates because of all of that.
Yes, right.
So, and again, one of the things that I've been seeing again and again for the last few years is actuals coming in higher than forecasts. And, you know, that's one of the ways that you know you're in the middle of one of these nonlinear change cycles, because when people forecast, they tend to forecast using linear models. Anyway, stuff is happening.
Well, and the good thing is that people are bringing back nuclear, and that's a good sign.
Right. And the nuclear that they're bringing back seems to be less dirty. And I had a story a couple of weeks ago about essentially small modular nuclear reactors that you know, are made in factories and then just installed on site. So the construction of the projects is much faster than the ones that we've all watched happen.
Yeah, the disappointment is we're not seeing those small modular nuclears becoming commercial as quickly as we'd like. I mean, it takes 10 years to get a full-size 10 gigawatt nuclear power plant built and installed.
But here they were talking about the 1 gigawatt modules, and it's a lot faster process. I suspect the licensing is longer than the construction now.
Yeah, it's a shame we're just not seeing any of them.
Uh-huh.
We see them all mentioned in the articles and the sound bites, but nobody's actually installing one that we become aware.
Well, certainly have not seen any announcements of that either. I'm expecting it, but I haven't seen it. Okay, now let us move to materials. And this is a different kind of graphene story. And what they have found out is with careful twisting and stacking that MIT researchers revealed a new exotic property in magic angle graphene, which is superconductivity, but it's superconductivity that can be turned on and off with an electric pulse. And one of the areas where they are excited about this is there is a kind of computing that they're working on that mimics how the brain operates, and it's called neuromorphic computing. And they think this could work to implement neuromorphic computer designs. And we've known about magic angle graphene for a while, and that at a low temperature it becomes a superconductor. What they've done here is they've made graphene that can be switched on and kept on with just a short pulse rather than a continuous electric field. And the key was how they formed the layers and how they stacked them. First, they had in the middle of this 4-layer sandwich, they had 2 layers of graphene that were offset by the magic 1.1 degree angle. And then on top, they had a layer of boron nitride, which is a 2-dimensional insulator that was lined up with the top layer of graphene. And on the bottom, they had another layer of this boron nitride. And it was at a 30-degree angle to the top layer. And what they were looking for when they were doing this was a way to get a stronger magnetic field, because they had these layers aligned like this. But instead, they found something completely different than they were looking for, and that is superconductivity, that if you give it a pulse at the right voltage level, you can turn it on. And if you give it a pulse again at the right voltage level, you turn it off. And so you don't need to continue to give it power to keep it in that state. And they had found with this twisted bilayer graphene that they knew by applying different voltages to it, it would change between being an insulator, a conductor, and a superconductor. You had to continue to apply that voltage to it to get it to stay that state. Once you hit it with the right voltage, it'll stay in that state and maintain that state. They think this will work for neuromorphic computers because the way the brain operates is we have neurons that once they get beyond a certain threshold, then they fire. And so this superconducting graphene system could imitate that, because once it gets to a particular voltage level, then it becomes the superconductor and the circuit can start firing. And they think, hey, we can use this to make these snazzy computers that imitate the brain. Whatever it is, they will figure out other new ways to use it. And it still is, I think, yet another amazing thing that we have discovered with these 2D materials. And remember, we're still in the infancy of this technology. So I'll throw it open to comments. Rarely do I get any comments on my material stories.
Well, I didn't see anything about the temperature at which this occurs, but other articles about graphene superconductivity say that it happens at about 4 degrees Kelvin.
And
So-
that's what I had assumed is the case.
And that's pretty cold. That's liquid helium, and pretty cold and pretty hard to and
Right.
expensive to
Right.
create.
So it's hard for me to imagine, because of all of that stuff, any kind of high volume production use of any of this stuff.
But I do think that in MRI magnets, they do use superconductivity, so they must use liquid nitrogen to keep them cold.
And the other place where they use superconducting magnets are in these fusion devices, because they need to.
Yeah, you wonder they're creating these horrifically high temperatures for fusion, and they've got to have these horrifically low temperatures for the superconductivity in the
Right.
magnets. So how
Now,
do they sort that out?
Fortunately, I don't think they stick the magnets inside the tokamak,
No.
but it certainly is a thermal management problem. And anyway, I still like the material stories, because I know what we make things out of is materials. And as we get new materials, then we're able to make new things. And we often can't imagine what it means. Okay, now the space story this week is about they found something, I guess, out in what I would think is the Oort cloud, the cloud of stuff out beyond Pluto, I can't call it a planet because it's only half the size of Pluto, and didn't they take Pluto's planetness away a few years ago because they thought it was too little? Anyway, it's a rock called Quaoar. It's got the funniest spelling I've ever seen, Quaoar, and it's a dwarf planet in the Kuiper belt. And what they found is a ring around the planet. Let me show you what we got. This is just an artist rendition, and they're showing the planet looking in towards the sun. And so that white dot there is the sun, and here is the artist's rendition of the rings. They weren't able to actually see the rings. They knew that they were there because they were looking at a star on the other side, and they were able to see the light dim when the planet was in front of the star, and then dim a little bit when the light was coming near the star, and that's where the rings were. And one of the things about these rings is that they exist don't fit within any of the astronomers' ideas about rings. It looks like they're about 7 times the planetary diameter away from the planet. And if you look at the rings we know and love the best at Saturn, there are only 3 planetary diameters away. So these are further away, and they can't figure out what the deal is there. Maybe the planet has more mass or something. I don't know. But anyway, it's yet another discovery in our near neighborhood. And this one is kind of interesting to me because having the rings be where they weren't supposed to be able to be rings means yet again the astronomers have to go back and scratch their head and figure out now what's going on.
Well, I think the story is way out.
Okay.
It's way out, all right. When Cassini or whatever that satellite that had the orbits around Saturn, was it able to go through the rings, or are the particles so close in the rings that they can't drive a satellite through them?
I don't think they're driving the satellites through the rings, even though I think around Saturn the rings are made of real small particles. So you could probably drive a satellite through it without breaking it, but I don't know. Maybe they should try that.
I just wondered if the particles were so widely spaced that there were big gaps that we could get through, but
yeah, what I think I know about Saturn's rings makes me think the particles are close together.
Where's Daryl when we need him?
I know, I was thinking the same thing too. Okay, so the next story is an animal story, and this one is just, I think, just for our interest. And a kayaker got more than he bargained for, the article says, when he set off hoping to encounter some beluga whales. And I don't know how he got this idea, but he had what he tried was getting out there and singing at the top of his lungs from his boat in the ocean, and he would manage to draw a pod of beluga whales around him, and they started to interact with his kayak. And then he put on a scuba mask and began to dive and swim near the animals, and he was singing as he went. I don't know how you sing when you're scuba diving, but I can certainly imagine singing and the bubbles coming out, and maybe that's what he was doing. And then, to his surprise, the belugas actually began to sing back to him with their chirps and trills. And belugas do use high frequency sounds that resemble singing to communicate to each other. And maybe they were doing that to him. These animals really have pretty big brains, and they're social animals, and they communicate with each other. And it looks like if we give them a chance and we figure out how to do it, maybe they would have songs to sing to us too. Maybe they could sing us a story.
The whales probably thought he was pretty stupid.
Maybe they were saying, "Get the hell out of our water."
And I bet they thought he had a bad accent.
I thought
Yeah,
the
it is.
article would say if he was a wildlife biologist or whatever, but it never says
No,
anything
no, it didn't.
about
And
it.
so I think I had, like you, I had to fill in the blanks to even have the idea that you're going to go out there in your kayak and you're going to sing to the whales. Either he was a wildlife biologist or he was some wacko dude.
Maybe he had something to drink that he shouldn't have.
Okay. So now I have a story about us, and one of the things they know about is that it's good for people to converse, to talk to other people. And these scientists were doing a study called Quality Conversation Can Increase Daily Well-Being. And they're trying to follow up on some other research some other research had shown that communication with others makes you happier and feel more well-being. And they had identified 7 different kinds of communications that had these benefits. One of them is catching up with a friend, just catching up on your history, meaningful talk, whatever that is. I don't know the meaning of meaningful talk. Joking around, like I was doing there, I guess. Showing care, which is something that's big in our community, Lakeside, since we have all these old people next to these other old people, and there's always something going wrong with somebody. Listening, which is what I can see you guys are doing well now. Valuing others and their opinions, and then offering sincere compliments. So what they were trying to do was to design a study that would tell you the relative benefits of those different kind of communications. So they had their study group, of course, students from a college campus. These are the ones that always get studied in these things. And they were directed to engage in just one of these communication behaviors on a single day, and then report back that night about their feelings, their communications, their stress and connection and anxiety and well-being and loneliness and all of this qualitative stuff that the social scientists look at. And as it turns out, what they found out is that what kind of communication you didn't matter. What mattered for their well-being was that you did some kind of personal communication along these general lines, and that what they found is if you did it once a day, you received benefits. If you did it twice a day, you got more benefits, and 3 times a day, you got more benefits. So the more you did it, then the more benefit you got in terms of just how good you felt at the end of the day. And so they did also find that high quality face-to-face communication got better response than electronic or social media contact. What they didn't do is look at Zoom communication. So I wonder, does this electronic communication that we have here, where we're face to face but not in person, does that work the same? They didn't do that study. I'm sure Zoom would pay them to do that study. No, it's
Now,
just,
if,
go
yeah,
ahead.
if you're looking for an answer there, I do think that it does. It's better than staring into nothing. I've had the experience, being alone after my wife passed away, and I really didn't know very many people, even though I've been living here for a while. But I've been after trying to take care of my wife, and it took all my time and energy. And so I know that I had some Zoom uh, things, well, like yours, which I felt pretty good about, and with the Unitarian Church, like lately
Mhm.
the Zoom part is something I look forward for. But it's interesting that we should talk about it just now because this morning we saw Dr. Garcia. I don't know if you know who he is, at the San Antonio Hospital, and he apparently mentioned to Diane that she had improved her health rather considerably and noticeably, and he thought that it had to do with the fact that she was, having living with me. you know,
Uh-huh.
I thought it would drive anybody insane, but that's not happening. And but I mean, just the idea of being together and good, bad, or indifferent. I mean, people need one another. There's
Now,
just no two ways about it.
one of the things I think that might fit in with this is still the statistics on, like you're talking about, John, married couples tend to be happier and healthier. At least the man tends to be happier and healthier than he is living alone. I have heard that's not always true for women, but you know, if you live with someone, then you get a lot of this contact every day with someone,
Yeah,
as long as you still like each other.
yeah. Well, it's in our case anyway. I think on my part, I mean, I like Diane to be sure, but I mean, I really appreciate the fact that she's there. I mean,
Uh-huh.
it's really truly important,
Uh-huh.
because I can, I feel healthier, I feel better all
Uh-huh.
over. It's
Uh-huh.
amazing. I'm not sure how that works, but Garcia noticed it as well.
But
And
again, this is an issue I think that is particularly relevant over the last couple of years, because as we have been dealing with the different stages of the pandemic, it has affected our ability to be face to face with other
socialize,
people.
yeah, the
And
socialization is
and
very
again,
important.
I am convinced because of my own experience that this seeing people's faces even in a computer is seems a lot better emotionally than writing them an email or responding to them on Facebook or something like that, or talking on the phone.
Yeah,
So anyway,
It'll be interesting to see when they do these studies and compare conversations with a friend or conversations with an AI uh, uh,
yes,
entity and see if one is the same as the other.
uh-huh. Well, again, there's a lot of work that these social scientists can do yet.
shit.
Well, and the thing is, we've evolved. The only reason we've succeeded as a species is that we're social animals and teamwork. And it's reasonable to expect that we've been hardwired by evolution to require and seek out these social connections
Right. And you
because that's
can,
the only thing that works.
I got a dog
one
here
of the
that's
things that we are good at is cooperation. is one of the things that our species is really marked for.
Okay, I have a dog here that tells me to get up
Okay, well,
and get him out.
and you get along with him because he's another social
Social being, yeah,
species that likes to
exactly.
hang out with other folks.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, let me wrap it up now with a COVID story. And, 3 years into the
Yeah,
pandemic, really the question now becomes, we have a vast majority of humans that have been exposed to COVID and got vaccinations or gotten the diseases and have built up immunity. And we'd like to know how quickly do these different kinds of immunity fade? And the one thing that they are sure of here is that hybrid immunity, the result of both vaccination and a bout of COVID-19, can provide at least partial protection for reinfection for at least 8 months. They don't know longer than that because they haven't studied longer. And this hybrid immunity offers greater than 95% protection against severe disease or hospitalizations between 6 months and a year after the infection or vaccination. And so that's some of the best data they have got. It looks like immunity acquired by booster vaccination alone tends to fade faster than the hybrid immunity. And the real bottom line as I go through and look at the data in the article is that we still really don't know how long immunities last. That has a lot of implications for strategies with boosters and things like this, but we don't know. And one of the reasons that we don't know is one thing we do know from studying COVID is mutations of the virus changes the immune system's ability to react to it. For example, among those who have not been vaccinated, if they get an infection, the infection does, if the virus doesn't change, the infection gives immunity that may last for up to 3 years. But when they looked at some people, unvaccinated people who were infected with a pre-Omicron variant, 15 months later, their immunity from infection was less than 10% effective because of the mutations of the virus. So we don't know how long immunity lasts. It certainly looks like it is months, especially in the case of hybrid immunity, months, maybe years. We don't know yet. And we don't know because of the virus mutations. And from one of the scientists who was quoted in this article says the virus is evolving so fast that what's true today might not be true tomorrow. So how long is your immunity going to last? I don't know.
The next thing you know, they'll be telling us to go out without a mask and to make contact with crowds of infected people. that we all need to catch COVID.
Oh, that's right. Well, the young
big-
people need to catch COVID and the old people need to get boosters for their boosters.
Yeah. And if anything, it's great news for big pharma because we'll all need to buy vaccine subscriptions.
Uh-huh.
So,
That's right. We need to have a vaccine that works at room temperature so they can just mail it to you every 6 months.
I also heard that every mutation of the virus is, relatively speaking, less potent than the original before the mutation. You know,
Uh-huh.
so the virus sort of fades away over time. Can still make you sick, but it's not as dangerous anymore as the initial virus was. I mean, this is
Well,
what,
maybe it'll become like the common cold.
yeah, something on that order.
Right.
So anyway,
Anyway, that's what I've got for this week. And thank you for joining me. And we had
thank
good
you for,
discussions, and we'll try it again next week.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to 2025 when we can see what all happens.
That's right.
And
Tune
we'll
in.
still be doing this. Yeah.
That's right. Just keep tuning in.
Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
sure we'll see charts along the way.
Thanks,
Okay.
Richard. See you next
Okay.
week.
See you next
Peace.
week. Adios, friends.
Adios, Richard.